listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber.
And my name is Jamal Thomas. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have another amazing show for today. In the first hour, we'll be discussing the fragile Afghanistan peace deal with the Taliban that may be over with before it even started in the wake of U.S. airstrikes on the same Taliban on yesterday. We'll also get into the meeting between Erdogan and Putin to resolve the conflict in Idlib, Syria, or at the very least, try to. Basically, Erdogan has been summoned to Moscow. So we're going to get an idea today on whether or not that is going to make any ground. Also, we're going to get into discussion on the coronavirus. People seem to be freaking out about it, and we're hearing a lot of information saying that doctors may not necessarily be able to deal with this because of policy positions. So we're going to get a good discussion on that. In the second hour, we'll be delving into the big news surrounding the potential withdrawal of Warren out of the race after an embarrassingly abysmal showing on Super Tuesday. Coming in the third, we'll have a conversation that I think is going to be a spirited one on whether or not Sanders should offer Warren a VP spot. That is probably going to be a contentious debate, and we're going to look forward to your calls on that conversation. That said, but first, we have big, massive news. Elizabeth Warren, a few minutes ago, has dropped out of the race, meaning Elizabeth Warren is leaving the race. After a poor showing in Super Tuesday, where Warren came in either third or fourth, or fifth, in pretty much all of the states, including Massachusetts, her home state, and Oklahoma, apparently the state where she grew up in, Warren is pulling out of the race. Now, we were told that the Super PAC had stopped putting out money for her in these other states. My argument to that was mission accomplished. You've accomplished your objective of hitting the guy in the knees. And so now it's like your placement in it is less necessary. Nevertheless, she's out. The question becomes, will she support Sanders? Or will she endorse at all? And I suppose that is going to be another conversation that we have on the channel. My mom called while I was working on the script for today, and she said, "Boo, I'm not going to keep you long. Warren is out of the race." And I was like, yeah, I know there's been a minor celebration here at the office. This should be fantastically interesting, to put it mildly. Like I said, it's unclear whether she's going to back Sanders, to be honest. A lot of people on my channel don't believe that she will. A lot of people in the office don't necessarily believe she will. Considering the belligerence she's shown to him and his supporters over the last few months, the person who claimed to want big structural change and pushing for this kind of massive agenda was opening up a broad series of attacks on the person who the left trusts most on those lefty issues. Policy, environmentalism, this notion of the elderly, healthcare, education, et cetera, et cetera. The news was right on time as we were going to be having this conversation anyway, so we're going to dive into that particular discussion. The thing I want to talk about today, though, has to do with somewhat of a pep talk for Sanders supporters. To put it mildly, on Super Tuesday, going into the day after Super Tuesday, which was an abysmal Wednesday, there were a lot of his supporters that were demoralized. A lot of them under the weather, a lot of them aggravated, angry, upset, vitriolic, etc., etc. But you can understand why their expectations were dashed. It was believed that Sanders was going to do much better on Super Tuesday than he actually did. And when he got that quote-unquote shellacking, well, you can imagine that not meeting their expectations wasn't necessarily something that they dealt with all that well. The thing is, if a strategy is working, for the most part, you just stay with the same strategy. But all at once, the moderates consolidated, Warren remained in the race, which was the worst case perfect storm for one Bernie Sanders. We've known for the longest time that Sanders has had an ideological bend against pushing back on his opponents or being aggressive and going after his opponents. This kind of ideological religiosity where he would only stick to issues of policy, as if issues of policy and rhetoric and debate are the things that change people's minds. They are not. They are not. Yes, in some cases, in some people, yes, but not everybody is affected just based on an argument. most people move based on how they feel about something. Oftentimes, they think that they have intellectual reasons for this or for that, but ultimately, it's the feeling that is primary. That's the thing that goes first. Meaning, if you're standing on a stage and you're repeating policy over and over and over and over again, yes, you're going to get a lot of people with that policy, especially when that digs in them and it reverberates in them. And they're ecstatic and excited that somebody is articulating something that they believe for the life, but no one in the political space has ever mentioned. Yes, you will get those people. Those people will be massively excited. But what about everybody else? Regardless of what you think in regards to policy being the best thing for a particular group or a particular person, it is secondary to whether or not that person would accept that as true. You have to win a majority of the population in order to win. And if what you're doing is just debates, and those debates are not getting you the bang for your buck, then you need to come up with a different strategy. Fortunately, it seems that Sanders has finally started to turn over a new leaf and has opened up a broad series of attacks on Joe Biden. Let's hear the clip.
We're going to beat Trump because this will become a contrast in ideas. One of us has spent his entire life fighting against cuts in Social Security, wanting to expand Social Security. Another candidate has been on the floor of the Senate calling for cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Veterans Program. One of us led the opposition to disastrous trade agreements which cost us millions of good-paying jobs, and that's me. And another candidate voted for disastrous trade agreements. One of us stood up for consumers and said we will not support a disastrous bankruptcy bill. And another candidate represented the credit card companies and voted for that disastrous bill.
Yes! You heard the booing in the crowd. He had him engaged. Yes, you can talk about policy, but also sometimes you need to put a knife in the person. You need to expand your margins while undercutting his. If you know that there are areas that Joe Biden is getting support from, where those people may not entirely fully understand his record and understand the things that are adversely affecting them that he is pushing for, well, you need to explain that. And you just articulating argument isn't of itself not necessarily enough. Spicy Bernie is my favorite Bernie. Belligerent, going on the attack, and honestly going on the attack. These aren't things where he's making up. These aren't things he's lying about. These are things, vagaries of Joe Biden's record that should be explored, should be brought out, and he should have been doing this from day one. What are the things that you want to accomplish in this world? What is the calamity, the individual calamity that goes on all throughout the United States in regards to people not being able to pay or getting paid a particular wage, having relatives that are ill, having medical bills, having the choice between whether or not you're going to eat versus get some particular medication, cutting insulin doses, whatever that calamity is. Think of all of those things that go on through the context of our country. And your guy, Sanders, is the guy who's saying, I'm the fix for that. I am the one who's going to push through big structural change. I am the one who's going to tax Wall Street and tax the oligarchs. I am the one who's going to make your life that much easier from the standpoint of education or healthcare. That's me. I'm that guy. And make that case. But make that case in a prosecutorial way where you put a knife in your opponent. That is just good politics. That is your job. Those people want you to be that avatar. They want you to be out there pushing and cajoling for them and their interests. The issues are far too big for you to have your own political sensibilities and ideological aversion to being aggressive and going after the campaign. A lot of people are going with, oh, this race is over, just like they were saying this race was over with Joe Biden. It is not. There are a lot of states and a lot of delegates, and now that everyone else has cleared out the race, it is a clear race between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And when they're on the debate stage, Sanders, who is an amazing debater, who has won all of these debates, is going to be on stage with Joe Biden saying stuff like this.
And for folks in the working class that are below 400, they will, in fact, increase their premiums. The public option will be available in my plan. We'll make sure it's not quality. We'll make sure it's only affordable.
This sundowning septuagenarian is going to be on a debate stage with Sanders, one-on-one. There's not going to be 10 other people on the stage where Biden gets like 4 minutes of speaking time. Biden is going to have to stand on that stage for an hour or 2 hours and actually debate policy after policy after policy. And he is going to be on that stage saying stuff like this. If Biden is on that stage saying black people can't raise their kids, that is not going to go over well. If Biden is confusing words, I'll end it here, that type of stuff, that is not going to go over well. He's failed miserably in these debates. So yes, he had an amazing Super Tuesday. Yes, the Sanders camp got caught off guard in regards to all of these moderates coalescing all at once and Joe Biden getting the win in South Carolina. But I would hope at this point, at least based on the reporting that is out in the Wall Street and the Washington Post and Politico, that he is taking a new leaf in regards to this campaign and realizes what I am doing currently is not working with the entirety of the political apparatus against me, my supporters, and the things that I want to accomplish. Yes, I would have wanted him to rip the chains off months ago. Yes, I've been screaming about this. Screaming in an empty room, looking into a camera. Be more aggressive, go on the attack. The things that you want are so important as compared to the things that they're going to push through. If you don't believe in radical incrementalism, if you think Joe Biden is going to lose to Trump, then you have every responsibility in the world to put your own ideological base to the side for the moment, meaning your own ideological bearing and aversion to going after your opponent, and go and do God's work. Sanders is not done. This race is not over. Don't be demoralized. This is just the second line of attack. No contest or no war exceeds the first interaction in regards to battle. And right now, Sanders' camp has turned over, hopefully, a new leaf. So what do you think, Bob? You think he's going to stay with this new leaf, or you think he's going to fall back into old patterns?
I think at this point he's going to have to stay with this new approach at least through next Tuesday, which is another big day for him. And I think, honestly, Jamal, he probably watched our show yesterday.
Maybe.
And that's what
he just came out fighting.
I want to slide it. We're going to switch gears here after the break to Afghanistan, the latest from Syria, major destruction in both of those theaters there. We have a couple calls on the line. If we can keep these callers short, we don't have to keep you on hold for the next hour. Tyrese, thank you for calling into Political Misfits. What's on your mind today?
Yes, Elizabeth Warren dropped out. She's a fake progressive. She could have stayed in there, like Joe Biden helping out Bernie Sanders, but yet she dropped out. Okay, and I think Joe Biden a good pick for Joe Biden. I don't like Joe Biden, but they need somebody with youth and experience. I think they might go with Gavin Newsom of
California. Yep.
Yeah, because he's tall. He got 30 years experience. His first person he worked with was Willie Brown of San Francisco. He became also mayor of San Francisco. He's connected to Nancy Pelosi. So I think Gavin Newsom, he will be the youngest out the four. Pence, Trump, Biden, and him. He will be the youngest. So that's my opinion. What y'all think?
Tyrese, thank you for your call. Gavin Newsom, great smile, great politician, good-looking young children there.
Yeah.
The other question there that you just kind of posited there, Tyrese, is Mike Pence going to be the VP nomination? Many people say he'll be pushed out along the way. Nikki Haley obviously floated there. Jay, you're on the line here with Political Misfits. Thanks for calling in. What's on your mind today?
Indeed. How y'all doing? Hey, Thomas.
What's going on, man?
Debates. I can't do that right now because I don't have enough time and I gotta go to sleep.
So what's on your mind?
I think what people need to talk about is why there's so many people trying to say that Bernie needs to pick Warren as her VP.
Oh yeah, we're going to get into that in the second hour. That's going to be a interesting topic, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm calling because I got to go to sleep because I won't be able to be a part of that conversation. But it's like she's known as a liar. Like people, like I just watched Crystal Ball try to act like she hasn't already shown us who she is. It's like I don't see any benefit to picking her as a VP. It's like she's been shown to be a liar. She's been shown to not really care about her so-called values. Like why would he choose her as a VP?
Yeah, that's a good question, JJ. If you do want to catch our show after you are up and ready, you can check it out on all the different podcast platforms that people check it out. Of course, you can see it on Facebook Live or the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel. Let's go ahead and take that break that I promised there, Jamar. We're going to be talking about the latest from Afghanistan. Quite scary stuff here as the Taliban and the United States seemingly can't get this peace deal. Again, peace deal's not the best language to use when they're bombing each other right now. Can't get it to stick, but maybe there's some good hopes that some of the people that have been committing war crimes in that country over the last 20 years are finally held accountable. That and much more after this break. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with Iron Man Bob Schlehuber. And let's jump across the pond and a little bit further to Afghanistan. The United States signed a peace deal with the Taliban on Saturday, but it's fair to say if you're bombing people who you've just signed a peace deal with, something has gone severely wrong. Just the day after the deal was signed, the president of Afghanistan took issue with some of the provisions of the deal, saying that the United States had made promises regarding the release of thousands of Taliban prisoners that were not in its purview. Then yesterday, the United States launched airstrikes on Taliban fighters in Helmand province. A U.S. spokesperson said that the strike was launched in response to Taliban attacks on Afghan forces. All parties still say they're committed to the peace deal. A Taliban spokesperson on Twitter wrote that the group, quote-unquote, plans to implement all parts of the agreement one after the other to prevent conflict escalation. The opposite side should also remove the obstacles in implementing all parts of the agreement so the way is paved for comprehensive peace and for Afghans to have their basic rights, he added. If it was not clear, it's not clear whether there were any casualties. So we're joined by Kathy Kelly, American peace activist, pacifist, and author, one of the founding members of Voices in the Wilderness and co-coordinator of Voices for Creative Nonviolence. Kathy, how are you today?
Oh, thank you. I'm okay. Certainly concerned about lots of news stories, and I'm glad you're focusing on this one as well.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal. We cover domestic politics, and this is also politics by any other name, right? So 2 questions on this to start off, and we're going to get into another story about the ICC that we're going to talk to you about. But starting off, if we're signing a peace deal, and the goal is to leave, at some point you have to leave, and at some point it is going to fall down. And the argument that we should continue these bombings, for the most part, is arguing that we should be there forever. Now, what do you think of this peace deal, and is this peace deal going to be able to last, considering that we're bombing the people who are supposed to be on the other side of the table with us already?
Well, I certainly want to acknowledge how speculative anything I have to say is because, it's been pointed out that the only group that seems to know what a lessening of violence would consist of in the aftermath of this very fragile, quote, peace deal seems to be the United States, and they get to define whether the violence has lessened or not. It seems that the Taliban very much want the release of 5,000 prisoners, and Ashraf Ghani's government has said, well, that's not something we negotiated. So then, we learn of 76 attacks in 24 different provinces, 15 Afghan soldiers killed, and the United States attacked the Taliban. I believe there might have been 11 to 15 Taliban soldiers killed, but it seems as though Ashraf Ghani did commit to stopping the further usage of special operations groups now trained by the CIA, but organized by the National Directorate of Security, certainly one of the most feared military groups. It's a military intelligence group. It's been very compatible in a sense with the CIA, and they're not going to do the special operations kinds of raids that they've been trained to do. So that may be one sign of lessening violence. But I think we also have to reckon with the fact that the Afghan government itself is constitutive of various warlords that Ashraf Ghani sort of had to invite in order to try to keep the peace. And these are work of a peace deal when people with so much to profit and gain from. States, I think, is the most well-heeled. By continuing the war, are the ones negotiating the deal. I mean, who has represented Afghan women, warlords with very bloody crimes in their history? And then the United States, who has represented Afghan young? That's who makes up the majority of Afghanistan's population, women and young people.
That's a really good question. I mean, and, the Washington Post comes out with the article making the point that Afghanistan has effectively been a litany of failures. I mean, utterly astonishing in regards to what many of the administration was saying as compared to what was actually true on the ground. Donald Trump seems to actually want to extricate himself from Afghanistan. And this peace deal may be the way that he's trying to extricate himself from this issue. And I would imagine that the Taliban also wants him out. I don't think they want the U.S. presence in that region. Are there actors outside of Taliban purview? One of the hardest things sometimes is to try to get the people who you are working with to stop committing violence in order to allow the peace deal to take place. Is that what's taking place? Meaning it's not necessarily the brain trust of either the Taliban or the brain trust of the Afghan government. There are other actors in this process, potentially warlords, that don't necessarily want this to come to an end.
Well, certainly you've got people with a heavy investment in the opium traffic, the poppy crops. The Taliban ought not to be viewed as a kind of monolithic group. You've got Taliban representatives in Doha living quite comfortably. They've been there for years now. And, they aren't necessarily directly connected with Taliban fighters and their commanders on the ground in Afghanistan. And then you've got people that are desperate for work, desperate for jobs. There isn't employment available. And then the Taliban or some other armed group, it might be Daesh, it might be the Islamic State in the Levant, can say, we'll give you a motorcycle and a gun. Join with us. So,
a motorcycle and a gun, join with us. I love that. I want to move slightly to the ICC. Now, during the time that John Bolton was in the administration, John Bolton was openly attacking the ICC, threatening arrest and whatnot. And then today, the International Criminal Court authorized an investigation into alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan, overturning an earlier rejection of the inquiry. Now, the United States is not a signatory to the ICC, which is, you would think shocking for freedom and democracy and lovers of justice to not be part of the International Criminal Court. And even weirder still, that aspects of the administration was actually attacking the ICC for their potential investigation. It's kind of unclear what's going to happen. The ICC is going to look into actions by the United States, Afghan, and Taliban troops, though The Guardian also warns that allegations against the UK forces could emerge in the process. Now, like I said, the U.S. is not a signatory of it, but if something is happening to a country that is a signatory, then the country can be held responsible. Now, what do you think about this? Meaning, we don't necessarily take all that kindly to the ICC looking into the affairs and any notion of U.S. committing some kind of war crime goes against the normal modus operandi in the way that the media talks about our behavior into these war zones. Does this seem like a moral victory, and does it have any chance of success? Meaning, is there going to be any real concessions or anything real coming out of this?
Well, when I think about the people who've suffered hellishly in Afghanistan, I feel as though it isn't commensurate to experience, but I have to still recommend education. We've got to inform the United States public about actions that the United States should be held accountable for. And yes, there is overwhelming evidence of war crimes having been committed. It's been assembled in reports that Amnesty International has filed with heartbreaking case studies. It's been assembled by reports from the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. And one of the most important, and I realize this doesn't intersect with the ICC case because they're going back to 2003, 2004, but in 2008, in a small town called Azizabad, United States military contractors, groups that the United States military is responsible for because they contracted out to a group called Armor Group, and now they've been subsumed by GS4. But this security group had decided that they would take on trying to provide security for the construction of an extension to an airport in a remote area of Afghanistan. Then they contracted out the responsibility to hire people, give people transportation, ammunition, paychecks. And then how are they going to make that happen in this remote area? You know, it's not like you deposit the money in somebody's bank account. So it got contracted out to two local warlords. And then they got into a feud between themselves. And USA Today traces this entire story until the gruesome end when the local warlords in a clan feuding operation triggered a United States attack without the United States having done all what they should have done to figure out how they could avoid doing harm to civilians. 91 people were killed, 60 of whom were children. The United States CENTCOM did their best to cover that story up, to bully people into not giving their reports, people like United Nations agencies. And so the USA Today reported in January of 2020, they most recently updated this report that came out after the Afghanistan papers were issued. People must read these reports.
Yeah, Kathy, and what's so devastating to me is even if the United States was to pull out troops, all of the United States overall is not going to leave that region anytime soon. I mean, obviously there's economic interest in the region, there's security issues that they're going to pertain to. I'm also really curious, and going back to that earlier question, what is the long-term role of the United States or the international community in Afghanistan? And I think of, say, women's reproductive rights. I don't think the Taliban's on the cutting edge of providing those services to the Afghan people. And so there's going to be a large vacuum left once the United States, if they ever pull out troops, or so they're going to leave some type of financial trail there, some type of footprint there. So what is the role of the international community, one that's highly uneducated on what is taking place there, to provide some humanitarian relief? And I guess I don't even know my question here, Jamal, is almost kind of like, who comes to the rescue of those children when the United States clearly isn't? Nobody. If the Taliban or the Afghan government clearly isn't, I don't think other countries are necessarily wanting to rush back to another people. What is kind of what's the long-term ramifications of 19 years of war?
You know, an Afghan teenager posed a question to Noam Chomsky years ago, one of my first trips to Afghanistan. He said, Prof. Chomsky, what do you think of reparations? Noam Chomsky said, that's a very important question. He said, any civilized country would pay reparations to Afghanistan for the suffering caused. And he extended that to every country that has invaded and occupied Afghanistan. So that included the former Soviet Union. I know it sounds like a pipe dream, but the United States should be held accountable, along with the other countries that dropped their bombs and made war profits in Afghanistan, ought to be held accountable for reconstruction. The reconstruction effort on the part of the United States has been horribly flawed, and nothing should be entrusted to the United States AID or to the United States military in terms of reconstruction. But that doesn't get us off the hook. There ought to be ways to involve credible agencies, some within the United Nations, certainly within the International Commission of the Red Cross, and there are agencies which could help with the rehabilitation of the agricultural infrastructure in Afghanistan, and that would be a way to get that country back on its feet.
What are some of those ways of rehabilitating, or if you were actually guiding or directing some of that money to be able to most urgently help Afghan people rebuild their country? Is it infrastructure? Is it agriculture? Is it the health system, education system? Or is it just simply just everything across the whole board?
Reseeding the orchards, replenishing the flocks, cleaning out the irrigation systems. Now, I have to acknowledge there was an effort to do that, and people who were starting it realized, hey, we could irrigate the poppy fields, and it got waylaid. But you have to have people who will stay with the project, not be on a rotation like, okay, I did my 6 months, I'm out of here, or even I did my year and I'm out of here. I've watched a medical doctor from Singapore who kind of embedded himself in a community, stay there since, really since 2004 is when he had first arrived. And he has a a history and an awareness, and there are others within Afghanistan who have that, but the people who get entrusted with major projects are often people who just know if we can show some photos that we completed this healthcare clinic. It doesn't matter if the clinic is going to be able to get electricity. It doesn't matter if there are ghost workers on the, list of the employees. It doesn't even matter if the clinic is going to be used. Just we got paid. And there's been so much corruption. Now, Afghanistan is now listed as, I think, in a tie with Somalia and North Korea as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So I'm not saying it's easy, but when you look at how much money has been spent on the United States military in Afghanistan, do you know, in the year when the surge that Obama had mandated was first being reduced, and there was they called it the largest retrograde mission in U.S. history. The cost to maintain one soldier during that time of escalating costs to bring the soldiers home, but when you averaged it out to the cost for one soldier, $2 million per year. So suppose that it was, $34 billion to start the agricultural infrastructure rehabilitation. That was a number that was being tossed around. Well, how many soldiers do you have to bring home in order to accomplish that sum? I remember an Italian doctor at the Emergency Surgical Center of Victims of War, after reading that sum, saying to me, $2 million per year. Yeah. Suppose you send 3 more of your soldiers home. You say bye-bye, and you give me that money, $6 million. What do I do? You could build a new hospital. The care of the United States has not been directed toward the people who have suffered the most over the course of this terrible war. When the United States just recently hit pine nut harvesters in the province of Nangarhar with a U.S. drone, a Hellfire missile, I believe it was fired from a United States drone. So there's no U.S. soldier on the ground anywhere near, and there were 32 people killed, and there were 40 survivors. Do you think those survivors had prostheses or access to surgery or clean bandages or ways to cope with having been maimed and crippled? That just doesn't come anywhere near the United States radar. Maybe some of the the U.S. pilots involved in drone warfare would have stories to tell, and there have been some very brave whistleblowers, and there are some returning soldiers who have stories to tell. But maybe the story that would at least prompt our interest is that 22 veterans of United States combat kill themselves every single day.
Yeah, and we saw that yesterday with the soldier approaching their Joe Biden on the campaign trail, basically being the blood of these soldiers that these elites and military generals continue to send into that theater. I'm curious, obviously Joe Biden's spoken out against the Afghanistan war, saying the only time he ever broke from Barack Obama was to speak out against the Afghanistan war. I don't expect anything different will happen under a Joe Biden presidency. I'm not even sure if Bernie Sanders would be able to address the things that need to be done. He's not willing to openly talk about reparations in a very coherent, necessarily way here in the United States, let alone for the Afghan people, and sell that to the American people. So I'm just kind of curious, Kathy, as we look at the different nominees that are still left in the race, is there anyone maybe possibly looking to change the conversation, or are we going to be pretty much stuck with whatever we get that we've had over the last 2 decades moving forward?
Well, you certainly see in each of the debates that no moderator really wants to seriously raise the questions about the United States military budget and the allocation of, I think it's $738 billion to go to line the pockets of major United States military contractors. They don't ask questions about Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon and General Dynamics. And those are the corporate welfare companies in the military contractor world that don't defend the interests of people in the United States. And we can't begin to talk about tackling the very real problems we face with climate catastrophe, with mass incarceration, with immigration, with declining infrastructure, until we tackle dismantling the obscene and bloated United States military budget, which then drives the incentive to create more wars so that these weapon makers can create more profits. I mean, it's a criminal activity, and they won't address it.
You know, the sad part about it is you're right, and you're right on several points, especially from a larger perspective. Meaning, I would even go so far as to say it's worse. You know, one of the things that or sayings that I have is sitting on the moon looking at events. Basically, you're looking at the world not necessarily tethered or stuck within the context of a particular country or culture or whatever, but you're looking at it from a larger context. And when you're looking at our policy, especially military and foreign policy, we often ignore what we do around the world while paying a huge amount of attention to what other people do, which creates this weird schism when candidates are talking, or for that matter, when you see talking heads on media. I mean, Obama helps, 500, all of this money, like billions of dollars, into trying to depose Assad and get rid of Assad. But the media will never talk about it that way. And if it comes up in media, it will be quickly pushed away to, well, the government says it's not doing that. Like, it's utterly astonishing that media ignores this. Do you think this is a factor of media or a factor of the public itself? Meaning, is it just media has a blind ideological devotion to whatever the U.S. does, especially on issues of foreign policy? Or is it the public is just disengaged from that particular topic? Is it the chicken or the egg?
Well, I think it is a lack of education of the United States public. I think that the military contractors have a vice-like grip on media and education in this country. And so it still is relevant to talk about the military, industrial, congressional, media, Washington, D.C. complex. That doesn't lessen our responsibility to try to accomplish the education that's so desperately needed. But I think most United States people are quite vulnerable to sports and entertainment, and a kind of a cursory glance at these political debates. But I think often people feel so kind of remote from the problems that are caused in the United States foreign policy. They feel so uncertain that they're very reluctant to speak up. And we see that, I think, reflected in a kind of tolerance that the United States public seems to have for United States war crimes having been committed again and again and again in places all over the world. Overthrows, coups, disappearances, massacres, death squads, torture.
But that's kind of my point. Isn't the responsibility of media to hold government accountable and to keep government, meaning there's no way for the population to know what their government is doing if they're not being told what their government is doing?
I think that's part of it. I think the other thing that I would throw in there is the complete institutional overtake of the U.S. military and how they've overtaken anywhere and everywhere that tries to do anything outside of their purview. I mean, I think of the United States Department of the U.S. Institute of Peace, the board chair of the U.S. Institute of Peace is Stephen Hadley. Stephen Hadley is also on the board of Raytheon. I mean, are you kidding me? The guy is on the board of the largest missile maker in America, as well as on the board of the U.S. Institute of Peace. And I as somebody who studied at American University, the School of International Service, which was founded to wage peace around the world. They studied international peace and conflict resolution, and we constantly had different professors and the dean trying to push different generals to come in and speak and different military come in to speak, because they say, if you want to understand peace, well, you need to speak to the military and generals and how they think. And for me, it's like, well, then go study at Georgetown, George Washington, University of Maryland, the War College, or any other college in America. Is there not one place that is sacred ground to simply talk about peace? And so as much as, like, even if you have the media speaking out against it, you still have then the CIA, FBI, the White House, everybody else calling those journalists, don't publish that, don't push that. Yeah. And so even if you have a brave media willing to speak out, you still have the military every step behind them saying, don't do that, otherwise you're cut off from all of us. And so it is like almost like a third component to say, how do we get the military off the back of media for media to speak out when they already aren't doing the right thing, which adds just complexity to, I guess, the question.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, Glenn Greenwald made the point that the media, for the most part, has been, you have these creatures of the intel committee communities in media now. Like, you know, if you look at CNN or MSNBC, there's always a spook on MSNBC or CNN willing to tell you the perspective of it, basically the intelligence services. It's so bizarre.
Well, you know, there's an old adage, if you spread the peanut butter too thin, the bread rips. My recommendation is to try to know a lot about a particular place in the world. And for younger people who can learn languages much more quickly than some people like myself, learn a language, become really saturated, if possible, in at least one place where people are not able to escape the consequences of U.S. war making. And when you know a lot about one place, it becomes a lot more easy to start to at least get a foothold in trying to understand what's happening in other places with similar patterns, because there certainly is a pattern of the United States empire, the United States desire to control and to say to other countries, if you do not subordinate yourselves to serve our national interests, you. And case in point, what we've done to Iraq. But then also to recognize that this is transnational. These big, huge military contractors are not only selling their weapons as the major export from the United States, but they're also then involved in getting many other countries to build and to sell and to store and to use these weapons. So I think it's important to recognize that it's kind of a David and Goliath relationship, and Goliath is huge, a behemoth really, and yet we have to dig in and have an almost airtight case for a particular instance that we can give as an example.
Yep. Kathy Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Kathy Kelly, an American peace activist, pacifist, and author, one of the founding members of Voices in the Wilderness and co-coordinator of Voices for Creative Nonviolence. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
Well, Elizabeth Warren, who's dropped out of the race, is now giving a press conference. Let's just turn for a few minutes and listen to what Elizabeth Warren has to say now that she's announced her dropping out.
Not right now. Senator, I know that your campaign manager, Roger Lau, said on the staff call today that he had no regrets. Do you feel the same way?
Oh, I do. I have no regrets at all. This has been the honor of a lifetime. 10 years ago, I was teaching a few blocks from here and talking about what was broken in America and ideas for how to fix it. And pretty much nobody wanted to hear it. And I've had a chance to get out there and talk with millions of people. And, we have ideas now that we talk about that we just weren't talking about even a year ago. A 2-cent wealth tax and universal child care that could be real. We could make it happen. And canceling student loan debt for 43 million Americans and raising Social Security payments. Those are life-changing events for people. And we can actually do this. So I'm delighted to have been here and honored to have had this chance.
That was Elizabeth Warren. She has dropped out. She says she's not ready to endorse yet.
I massively dislike her. I massively dislike her. Nobody was talking about education. Nobody was talking about getting rid of expunging student debt.
2-cent wealth tax. I'm pretty sure we've had a 2-cent wealth tax. It was just called higher tax rates in the past. I mean, I get her point, but again, these things were been talked about. So she's obviously
they were talked about in 2016.
Yes,
and it was
before.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, come on, like leaving as disingenuous as you came into it.
Yeah, we do have just one caller I want to get to on the line here, as Charles wanting to talk about the role of the media in warfare. They're also pretty good at not holding candidates accountable to their words. But that's Charles, real quick here, what do you have on your mind today?
I was just thinking about the role of the 96 Telecommunications Act, build the regulations that kept media from consolidating, and it basically made the media like a sixopoly, basically, where 6 major companies bought out all of the smaller companies. And it's now coming clear to me why they did that. It wasn't just money, but it was also to make sure that the media was like in compliance with the other things they were doing. So with the media not covering stuff, it was a way for them to utilize the media, and they still doing it. They still nobody's talking about putting the 1996 Telecommunications Act, repealing that. That needs to be repealed, and we need to have take away this this sixopoly on the media. And I don't have.
Yep. And that was under Bill Clinton, Democrat, by the way. Yep. Just so we.
That's a great point, Charles. Thank you for that. On that, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back after this with Peter Ford talking about a huge meeting between President Erdogan and Vladimir Putin there in Moscow. We'll talk about that and much more after this break. Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
In traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We've been talking about Afghanistan, where the U.S. and Taliban are apparently still committed to their peace deal, even though one of them is bombing the other. Give us a call, 202-521-1320, if you have anything to say about that. We turn our attention now to Syria. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Erdogan had a 3-hour one-on-one meeting today to talk about a way to de-escalate what is coming closer and closer to direct conflict between Turkish and Russian troops. Dozens of Turkish troops have been killed in the last week in clashes with Syrian government forces, and Turkey says 184 Syrian government forces were killed in the last 24 hours. Wow. Ankara says its army downed 3 Syrian planes, destroyed hundreds of vehicles and equipment, and killed more than 3,000 government soldiers since the operation was launched on February 27th. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the State Department and the Pentagon are evaluating Turkey's request for Patriot surface-to-air missiles and other weapons. Yes, that's you taxpayer dollars. Wow. And, of course, you have members of the U.S. government bemoaning the fact that the Syrian president, after a war of nearly a decade, still has the audacity to want to control all of what? Of Syria. Marco Rubio, little Marco, tweeted out, in the end, Russia and Turkey have conflicting and irreconcilable goals in Syria. Erdogan wants a buffer zone he controls in northern Syria. Putin wants Assad to control the entire country and won't recognize Turkish military presence in Idlib
Mexico
as
wants
legitimate.
Texas back. Mexico wants a section of Texas.
How
They wants a buffer zone in Texas.
Dare they want to have control over their own country? Peter Ford, the former UK ambassador to Syria, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Peter, a guest earlier this week framed this meeting as Putin calling Erdogan on the carpet and said that Turkey and Erdogan personally had pretty drastically overreached with this gambit to control part of Idlib. Is that also your assessment? And is there anything about this meeting between the two presidents that you think will change the results or make any difference in what's been taking place?
Yes, it was hugely important. And what we've just seen, I think, is this is a boxing match. We would say it was a points win for Russia and Syria. The terms of the agreement haven't all been made public yet, but it's, from what little we know, it's clear that Erdogan has had to back off his maximal demands. He was demanding that the Syrian forces, government forces, should withdraw to the lines they held before the latest flare-up. That is not going to happen. The Syrian government forces are going to stay in control of the roughly 30% of Idlib land area that they recovered in the last month. They're going to keep the Jihadi hordes with their Turkish backers well away from the city of Aleppo, and they're going to retain control of the very important M5 highway, which links Aleppo in the north with Damascus in the south. And one important detail, there are going to be joint Turkish-Russian patrols on the other important M4 highway that links Aleppo with the coast, which means effectively that both highways will be open to commercial traffic, which is extremely important to the Syrian economy.
This is kind of maybe an ignorant question towards the strength of highways. How are these highways not completely blown and destroyed at this point? I just remember getting trapped that we were trying to get to Cairo in Egypt, and one of the highways was flooded, and we were trapped for 4 or 5 hours. I don't get how these supply movements of supplies are even able to still go down these highways and how they're still intact. It seems like you could just blow one of them up pretty quickly and cause mass disruption. Or is there some kind of like sacred spaces that both sides have left untouched?
Well, you have to bear in mind that the jihadis saw these highways as income generators. They levied taxes on any poor people who were trying to continue trade in the middle of a war. So the physical state of the highways is quite good. In any case, it's not a big deal to repair a broken highway.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. Like the charging of the of tolls, for example. Let me ask you this. So how does NATO play into this? Because Erdogan, the last watching Erdogan was making this argument that basically I'm going to send all of these refugees into Europe. Now, when you add in the coronavirus, meaning you have potentially, at the very least he's trying to, or talking about, or threatening millions of people, it's possible that some of those people are infected, considering the coronavirus is going all over at this point. And you have the secondary aspect where the politics of Europe was completely destabilized based on the number of refugees that were flooding out of Syria in this case. So does that leverage with the refugees compel NATO to get further involved, if that makes sense?
No, I think the ploy has backfired. The Europeans are furious with Erdogan for opening the gates and have little time for his aggressiveness. His tactics are completely wrong. He was hoping to get the Europeans on his side. In any the Europeans are not going to put troops into Idlib. So he is really wasting his time. He was apparently hoping that the Europeans would put pressure on the U.S. to intervene militarily on his side. But that's not going to happen either. No, his ploys are not working. Thankfully, there are no, as of now, there are no coronavirus cases in Syria. So we must keep our fingers crossed on that.
So let me just kind of read through here. This is what the Russian Federation has put out today after the Erdogan-Putin meeting. One, cease all military actions along the line of contact in Idlib de-escalation area starting at midnight their time, March 6th. That's tomorrow. Security corridor will be established 6 kilometers deep to the north and 6 kilometers deep to the south from the highway M4. Specific parameters of the functioning of the security corridor will be agreed between the defense ministries of the Turkish Republic and the Russian Federation within 7 days. On March 15, 2020, joint Turkish-Russian patrolling will begin along Highway M4 from the settlement of Truba to the settlement of An al-Havar. I'm curious what you think there, Ambassador.
Yeah, that just about confirms it. A point win for Russia, but it's only going to hold the ring for some weeks or months. We'll have to hold our breath.
Also, if there are continued terrorist incursions into Syria, I mean, we're going to be back where we started, right?
Yes, we will, but it's more likely now that Turkey will restrain the jihadis who were breaking the previous ceasefire, launching attacks on Christian villages in government-held territory, for example. It's likely that Erdogan will now put a shorter leash on those jihadi factions, giving less pretext, if you like, to the Syrian government forces to grab back more territory. So hopefully there can be at least a short period now of relative calm, but don't bet any money on there not being a further round a couple of months down the road.
Just to the west there, I'm curious what you make of the latest developments there in Libya. Obviously, that's not a place of pleasantry between Erdogan and Putin. Have they pretty much just kind of set aside their differences in that theater and focused on Syria today, or are tensions at an all-time high? I just can't imagine these two sitting there together today and what the conversation must have felt like given the state of conflict they have in Libya, there in Syria, and elsewhere throughout the region. Any thoughts on the conversation there in Libya?
I think that's compartmentalized separately. For both Russia and Turkey, Syria is by far the more important issue because of geography. If nothing else, it's next door to Turkey, and there's a Kurdish dimension. This is absolutely crucial to Erdogan. But I've no doubt they spent a few minutes at the end talking about Libya, where again Erdogan has overreached, and he's getting a lot of flack in his own parliament for his aggressive military posture. Maybe Russia can help him back down on that one too.
Curious, as the former UK ambassador to Syria, now with the UK leaving the European Union, what's their role been in all of this? It seems like I haven't heard much. I mean, it's Germany, it's France, it's Greece, it's NATO, and obviously UK is a member of NATO there, but not necessarily an active participant. Has the UK been pulling themselves back out of these type of involvements in international affairs since Brexit?
The UK has sailed off into mid-Atlantic in splendid isolation. It's been virtually ignored in this latest spat over Syria. There was talk of a meeting between Turkey and Russia and France and Germany, but no one gave a thought to the British, who have more or less disqualified themselves by choosing to leave Europe.
Let me ask you this: the Kurds. You mentioned this in the last in the question before last. What is the relationship between the Kurds and Syria now? I mean, Trump says he's pulling out. He's stealing the oil, but he's pulling out supposedly. And you have a situation where, on U.S. media anyway, Kurds were apparently the 51st state. Or the area with the 51st state, and all of a sudden there were these bleeding hearts. What is the relationship between Assad and the Kurds currently?
They've never fought. Never been any significant military actions pitting the Kurds against the Syrians. The Syrian government forces withdrew some years ago from the Kurdish areas because they were facing an onslaught from ISIS at the gates of Damascus. And they left behind the Kurdish Peshmerga. But and over the years, the Kurds developed some autonomy, but they've never fought. And they're now having talks about the Kurdish areas becoming once again part of the Syrian state. They now have more and more common ground to make against Turkey.
Especially essentially making them an autonomous region by chance. Ish.
Autonomous, but an interesting, very recent development is that Erdogan apparently tried to bargain a bit of extra Kurdish territory against Idlib. He was ready to make concessions on Idlib in return for Russia agreeing to let him have the Kurdish town of Kobani. This will have infuriated the Kurds and driven them even more into the arms of Assad. So the U.S. presence in those Kurdish areas is on countdown. It is not sustainable.
That is so strange. Like, that is wild if he was going to do that. Is this this sounds like a land grab. I mean, basically from Erdogan. This, it looks like he's trying to get territory. Last question, 30 seconds. What's the reality of this? Meaning Erdogan making this argument that, look, my borders are being invaded, or is it more likely or more honest that he just wants the additional land? 30 seconds.
It's a land grab. You got it right the first time. Let's not forget that Turkey already grabbed a slice of Syria. It was 80 years ago in the time of the French Mandate, but that area bordering Idlib is basically Syrian territory. And Turkey, the inheritor of the old Ottoman Empire that used to rule all that part of the world, took back an important province of Syria. So this is just another chapter in a long history of Turkish.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was Ambassador Peter Ford, the former UK ambassador to Syria. Listen to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're going to be back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. There's a lot of stuff to cover this particular hour. We're going to get into our Trends with Benefits segment, and we're also going to go into the latest on Epstein. But first, let's dive into some election news. As always, you can reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. We appreciate your calls and the community involvement. So after shellacking, quote-unquote, shellacking on Super Tuesday by the comeback septuagenarian Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders gave a press conference to refocus the campaign rattled by a consolidation of the moderates going into Super Tuesday. I haven't been shy about pointing out Sanders' weaknesses around killer instinct or versatility of political strategy, going beyond this notion of just recounting policy. He firmly believes a campaign based on policy and the arguments should be these honorable gentlemen going after one another. Typically, this is a strength, especially in the areas of trust, authenticity being above politics or favorability, but at times it is also a fatal weakness if it's done with a religious devotion. Ideology is a poor substitute for reality, after all. Fortunately and thankfully, it seems that Bernie Sanders has gotten the message, and he's released several new ads. The first one was one I think we played yesterday with him touting his relationship with Obama. Let's hear that one.
Here's this ad yesterday from Sanders touting his relationship with Barack Obama.
Bernie is somebody who has the virtue of saying exactly what he believes, great authenticity, great passion, and is fearless. Bernie served on the Veterans Committee and got bills done.
I think people are ready for a call to action. They want honest leadership who cares about them. They want somebody who's going to fight for them. And they will find it in Bernie. That's right, feel the burn.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
I bet you do approve this message. You should have been approving this message before. You had all of these people thinking that Obama was backing Bloomberg because of the ads that they were running. He's turning over a new leaf. We also have this notion of Sanders being more aggressive, which is something I definitely appreciate. Let's hear Sanders opening up these attacks on Joe Biden.
We're going to beat Trump because this will become a contrast in ideas. One of us has spent his entire life fighting against cuts in Social Security, wanting to expand Social Security. Another candidate has been on the floor of the Senate calling for cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Veterans Program.
I love that clip. I love this clip.
One of us led the opposition to disastrous trade agreements which cost us millions of good-paying jobs, and that's me. And another candidate voted for disastrous trade agreements. One of us stood up for consumers and said we will not support a disastrous bankruptcy bill.
It was him, right? It was
and
Sanders.
I think it was him.
Candidate represented the credit card companies and voted for that disastrous bill.
Like I said, Spicy Bernie is my favorite Bernie. I love that. I love that. From your supporters with love, thank you. Thank you. So to discuss, we're here with our esteemed guest, host of the Discourse podcast, Brandon Sutton. Brandon, what's going on?
Nothing much. I'm just glad to be here. Glad to join you guys on a lovely Thursday afternoon.
I know. We are glad to have you. Picard comes out today, so I am uber ecstatic about that. Brandon, for the past year, I have been screaming into an empty room, looking into the camera, screaming, red face. You gotta open the tax. You can't just argue policy. Finally, his campaign, after the shellacking he got on Super Tuesday, they're finally coming around to this particular consensus, at the very least, that this is an existential threat, that he has to actually change what he's been doing for the past decade. Is this going to work, or is this too little, too late? What do you think?
Well, I think that his path to the nomination and the presidency is still very much intact. It's still a very realistic chance that he will win the nomination. Not to be conspiratorial, assuming that there's no fingers being, put on the scale too much, right? Even more so than in him just winning the nomination, I think you make a good point about, you assuming that he was being endorsed by Obama. Even more people, I would argue, assume that Joe Biden has Obama's formal endorsement. And I think that's a symptom of a larger dynamic within the Democratic Party that they have with their supporters, where a lot of their supporters, I think they're projecting their own values and their own ideals onto these candidates without fully understanding what they are actively standing for and actively calling for. I think that, if nothing else, Sanders has to distance not only himself from the Democratic Party establishment like Joe Biden, his problematic history, but distance Joe Biden from the policies that people think are so important, right? You can look at these polls and you see people think that Medicare for all and climate change and any list of topics are important to them, and then they also think that Joe Biden is their candidate, and it's just like that. Like that schism has to be exploited, if not for just today, for tomorrow as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's so bizarre. You would ask, one of the most interesting things in the exit polling had to do with Medicare for all. Even in the South, it was popular. I mean, at worst, it was still over 50%. And yeah, you have a lot of people who have a certain perspective of Joe Biden. Do you think that the issue is, well, this is lovable, gaff-ridden Joe Biden, where the policies matter less? Meaning it's more so the optics of what they think Joe Biden is or their impression of Joe Biden, kind of like the Obama stuff, the hope and change thing being an image molded around him, like you're in some kind of warp drive where you're putting gravity around yourself. Is that what it is? Or is it they think that Joe Biden is the person who can be sold to beat Trump? Meaning, are we just at the electability argument where they don't care about the policies? Or is it really an issue where they think Joe Biden represents the policies that they themselves espouse?
Well, I mean, I think it's a confluence of those issues, right? I think you have some people who are just, who are voting just because they want somebody who they think can beat Trump. And I think that Joe Biden, he comes in with the inertia. He's the vice president. He's been in politics for a very long time. He's a face they recognize. That's comfortable. That's electability to a lot of people, and that, that's appealing. Also, I would say that, he does have the Democratic Party, brand stamped on his forehead, and that leads people to project what they feel the party is about. You brought up Obama. I would say Obama cultivated this in a lot of people too, where they project those values onto the person, like the progressive values, hope, change, and what that means, and those vague notions become in people's heads. Not to armchair psychoanalyze, like specific policy things that they assume people stand for. A friend of mine, for example, was canvassing in New Hampshire before the primary, and he was surprised by how many people that he met who thought Pete Buttigieg was for Medicare for all.
Well, at one point, Buttigieg was.
For those who wanted it, Brandon.
Yeah.
For those who wanted it.
The aggravating about that, Brandon, I agree with you. I think you're right. This notion of people projecting their values on other people. I think the aggravating part about that goes back to the argument about Sanders, where, anybody can stand on stage and lie. Anybody can misrepresent their perspective, meaning Biden can get on stage, I was always for Social Security, when there are a litany of videos where he wasn't. I was for the Civil Rights Movement, when there's a litany of videos that he wasn't. And the issue becomes, unless the candidate says so, meaning getting over this aversion, going after your competition, then the public is going to leave with a mistaken impression of that person. I guess the catch becomes, is Sanders going to be able to keep this up, or is he going to fall back into his old ways?
Well, I mean, that is the question, and I hope he keeps it up. But even more so, just to jump off what you were saying, to piggyback it a little bit, it's that dynamic where if you make these attacks, because this has the chance of backfiring on him, but it's not just backfire. It backfires of a larger truth, where it's the Democratic Party, the Joe Bidens of the world, are invested in maintaining this myth with people that they are afraid, and this is a danger that Sanders really poses with these attacks and with his candidacy and his campaign generally, to expose the mythology, or rather to show the average Democratic voter, for lack of a better construct, what the Democratic Party is actually about.
Yes.
That's for me, and I want to take Sandra's call here in a second. Is where Warren really fell flat to me, is because she said, look, everything's corrupt. We need to change, big structural change. But the one sacred cow that's not corrupt is the Democratic Party. This is a party that we can still save, that we can rally behind. Mike Bloomberg, you're not supposed to be in our party. You're not part of us. And it's like, no, this guy fits in, actually.
He is, right.
And that's why a ton of Democratic consultants beyond the paycheck were willing to work for the guy. And this idea that she somehow thought that the Democratic Party is still good and people should still run on it. For me, it's where she kind of shifted into. She came from a Republican background from the left, and the Democratic Party was the savior party, because if it's not the Republicans, then it's the Democrats. And you have somebody countering her, Bernie Sanders, who's like, no, this whole thing is so stupid and dumb. Sure, I'll caucus with them when I need to, but like, how do you possibly think this party is not a corporatist party, and you're going to speak about the importance of a 2-cent wealth tax? How can you say that and then still talk about this party not being corrupt? Sandra, thank you so much for your patience. You're now on the air.
Yes, me and my family watch you all the time.
Thank you.
I can't believe that Elizabeth Warren thinks that everybody is so stupid to believe her.
Some people
Fair
do.
enough.
I thank you.
I don't know if I thank you for the call.
Thank you.
I'll let Brandon respond to that. I think that's a tough. Yeah, I think she's strong. I don't know. I don't think people. I don't think she's a straight liar that people are like idiots for believing her. I don't think she's
a straight liar. Straight liar might be too strong. I do think she's massively disingenuous when she runs the campaign. That's all. And it's, for example, her kid wasn't in public school. I mean, a charter school woman went to Elizabeth Warren, was going after her, and Warren was like, my kids went to public school. And she was like, what, really? And she was like, yeah. Now, this was flagrantly dishonest. Even I'm a grassroots funded campaign, which you pull money into the thing. That's what a lot of people point to about the dishonesty issue that they take qualms with. And by the way, the whole, what does the Democratic Party stand for? There's an awesome conversation between, I think it's Donna Brazile and the gentleman on the Daily Show now, the one that's not funny. And in that conversation, I can't think of his name, but in that conversation, he asked her, what does the Democratic Party stand for? And Donna Brazile, was mumbling, trying to come up with an answer. She says, well, Tom Perez is the head of our party. I suppose there's something with him. Like, it's fair point. It's an experiential thing, right? If your party, supposedly the party on the left, and supposed to represent the interests of the left, and this is going directly with what you're saying, Brandon, that if indeed they're the left, then how are you fighting so hard, even against Warren? I mean, the wealth tax is a lefty idea. Going after Wall Street, that's a lefty idea. If you're going after, a Green New Deal, expansion of Social Security, expansion of Medicare, all of those things are lefty ideas. And the Democratic Party considered those things an existential threat. And I suspect that the reason they consider it a threat, because if Sanders is representative of the Democratic Party and he represents all of these things, then what are we? You know what I mean? Like, it automatically shows it to be a con the moment that you show yourself being against all of these other priorities that supposedly the people on the left pushed for.
Well, absolutely. And I think that the difficulty in describing what the Democratic Party's underlying ideology is, like boundaries of their party, comes from the fact that on the surface level, like, they don't really have any. It's like, they might litigate these, and these aren't minor issues, obviously, but because they have real impact on people's lives. But on the highest levels, they're perfectly capable of articulating and, interrogating various issues as it relates to racism and feminism and LGBTQ rights to a certain point. And especially as part of their their brand. But then if you actually ask them how that affects the way they operate their party materially, they can't really answer that, because at least once a month, there is somebody in their party advocating for the fact that they should be allow anti-choice Democrats in. So it's less about them being unable to it's rather less than not having an ideology. It's that to really understand what they're about, you really have to understand what ideas are they elevating, what ideas are they burying, who's being allowed in, who's being elevated in the party, and who's being shut out, and for what rationale. They're shutting out somebody like Bernie Sanders, and the more they do that, the more Bernie lets them shut him out without actively distancing his part, actively centering his being shut out on the ideas he's bringing to the table, and not some issue of manners or race or not being woke enough. The more they win, in the debates, he's going to have to actually center Biden's history and say, the reason why they want Biden to be their candidate and not me is not for these sort of shallow symbolic reasons. It's because at the end of the day, Biden is cozy to power and I'm not. That's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely good points. I just think of like, what is the Democratic Party and all the things they say. Muriel Bowser, the mayor of this city, has to somehow come back to D.C. I think she's still out there for Bloomberg, just lost in the woods, in all fairness to her. How does she come back and say, yep, I'm the Democratic Party. You know, I supported Bloomberg because he supported these ideas, these ideas, these ideas. That's our ideals. And then she's going to somehow talk about policing issues, racial inequality issues, housing issues. None of it. How are you somehow going to talk about what it means to be a Democrat and rally the troops around addressing the crises that 7,000 people don't have homes here in Washington, D.C.? Outside of our studio on K Street, there are people living in a tent.
Oh,
what are you going to say on the street? A tent on the street, Muriel Bowser. And so you're a Democrat right now, coming back from Bloomberg, the billionaire, and you're going to speak on behalf of Democrats. That is why I'm not a Democrat. That is why I am a misfit.
That's right.
Joanne, thank you so much for calling in. We really appreciate it. You wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I really, I must say, Mr. Jamal Thomas.
Yes.
Listen to you all the time, and I love what you say because I agree with you. Always said that Bernie needs to take the gloves off.
Yes, I've been saying it for like a year.
A long time, and I agree with you. I looked at all the debates because I really, really want him to win, but he's a little too passive when it comes to these people on the stage at the time. The thing that bothers me about Bernie is when he says, Joe is a friend of mine.
It bugs me. These people are not your friends. These people are not your friends. It's like you might have a collegial relationship in the Senate. You know, the Senate has these kind of rules set where these guys tend to get along a little bit better. But let's be clear. Everybody in this party is trying to end your career, your political career. None of them like you, including Warren. Like, I mean, them two might be friends per se, but ultimately this race and how she's ran this race, she has gone after Sanders more than she's gone after Biden. And Sanders was supposedly the one that was closest to her ideologically.
There's a plan. You know that. All of them got together so he would not win. I understand what they're trying to do, but Bernie must be aggressive. Listen, I was so devastated. I was so, hurt. But, like, all the commentators that I listen to, all the independent media that I listen to, and I say, okay, all right, I'll keep the faith, keep the hope.
Yeah, don't give up hope. I mean, like, look, we have a huge number of things that we need to accomplish in this country. And there's never going to be a situation where you get everything that you want, meaning there's always going to be a contest. You're going to have a huge of entrenched opposition, be it the billionaire class or the oligarchs, be it the media, who for the most part are millionaires who don't necessarily care about your agenda, be it the military industrial, like drug companies, all of these billions of dollars that these people have been able to make because of the way the country has pursued its affairs over the past, 40, 50 years. And all of that is now coming to a head to some degree with somebody who's trying to be against it and trying to marshal the public for it. It was never going to be easy. Never. You're always going to have setbacks. In the best case of scenarios, this is just the setback.
Joanne, thank you for the call. Brandon, I'm curious, is Joe Biden your friend? And is ultimately Joe Biden, I mean, is it Bernie Sanders' fear of not wanting to go down in history of saying, wow, I'm going to be blamed for Hillary Clinton losing and now Joe Biden. And so he says, look, I'll try to separate the man from the policy, which I don't think you can do. But is there something in the back of Sanders' mind that he's just fearful of attacking Biden as an individual?
Well, I mean, Biden as an individual is one thing. I mean, but also Biden and even Hillary Clinton as the avatar of the Democratic Party, I think he's afraid of weakening that brand. Because, unfortunately, and this was something that they manufactured, they are the only other political party in this country with the level of mobilization necessary to take on the Republicans. It's like, so if you damage their brand too much, then it might have implications for people who are not Joe Biden. It's like they put you in a very weird situation. On the same time, allowing Joe Biden to win is not an acceptable compromise to that, right? Because Joe Biden can't be trusted. Joe Biden can't be trusted to enact any kind of progressive agenda. It's like, so, as you have to be able to balance that dynamic properly. It's like Joe Biden is not a friend of mine. Democratic Party is not a friend of mine. But they might be necessary. But it also might be necessary. And by necessary, I mean it might be necessary to take over their party and take their infrastructure because they have it. They just don't utilize it properly. And so I think that that's the underlying issue with that too.
So we have quite a few calls here about Elizabeth Warren dropping out. I know Brandon's looking for the fan fiction about Elizabeth Warren being the VP pick of Bernie Sanders. You can check out Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter and the Discourse podcast if you want more from him. I know I'm a big fan. Michelle Whitty, our producer, also a big fan of yours here, Brandon. We were all fanboying over you today. The Discourse podcast, a great podcast to check out. Here is Patrick on the line wanting to talk about Elizabeth Warren dropping out. Patrick, thank you for calling in.
Thanks for allowing me to come on your show. And Jamaro, you're probably one of the best political analysts in America today.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you. I always appreciate kisses.
Flushing. Wow, you're flustered there a little bit. Oh, my goodness.
Wow. What's going on, man? What's the topic?
You saw right through Elizabeth Warren from the beginning. I think there's good things about her on domestic policy, but foreign policy, she's completely different from Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, yeah.
Opinion, she's a warmonger imperialist, especially when she legitimizes the coup in Bolivia, the way she talks about Venezuela. She supports sanctions, which are actually collective punishment. So her idea of being a feminist is hurting innocent women and children in Venezuela to achieve some kind of political means for the United States, really for U.S. corporations. And I just don't see her foreign policy being consistent with her being any kind of progressive or any kind of feminist in any way.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you so much for the call. It's greatly appreciated. 202-521-1320. Jamal, we got so excited a second ago to bash Warren that we cut off Sandra halfway through her point. She also wanted to comment on Warren and the media. Sandra, thank you for calling back and finish your point there about Elizabeth Warren and the media.
Thank you for having me back.
Yes, ma'am.
I just, I think that Elizabeth Warren has hurt Bernie Sanders bad. And I think she's committed political suicide, too, because when she comes up for re-election, for Senate, I don't believe she'll get it.
Let me ask you this. If Warren turns around and endorses Sanders, would you change your point of view?
No, because I'm sure it's something to benefit her and not the people. And I think that you all need to get the word out that people need to quit watching that mainstream media because they ain't done nothing this whole election but lie to the people and keep things covered up. And
we're trying. We are trying.
I'm not saying anything bad about Joe Biden, but I've got sense enough to watch him and see that he's sick.
Thank you for calling back, Sandra. We really appreciate it. Another call here on Warren and Bernie. Michael, you're on the air.
Hey, how's it going? I called yesterday. I didn't have time to say it. This is nothing against you, Bob, but JT, I'll reiterate what Patrick said, and I just love your take on everything, man, regarding politics.
You can say the same about me. Don't hold back. You can also, I'm here as well. Brandon Sutton's here as well. You can just compliment all of us since we're handing them out.
This is that I found this show through Jamal's YouTube.
That's fair. That's fair. We do appreciate it.
That's fair. Yeah, I have a home field advantage, so that's fair. What's going on? What's the topic?
Hey, okay. So, yes, when the whole Super Tuesday thing happened, I thought, okay, it's over. It's over for Bernie. Just because I knew that the media was going to run with a narrative like Joe Biden is the front runner, they were fawning to be able to do that for a while, right? Since this whole thing started, they wanted to do that. They were trying to who it was going to be. Is it going to be Pete? Is it going to be Amy? And then they found Joe just because he did that South Carolina, even though everyone knew he was going to win South Carolina, but they just did it in a way where they went with it, they ran with it, and it worked. They had the power to change Super Tuesday. And after the Super Tuesday, I thought that was going to be it because the narrative has changed, and they're going to run with that hundreds of, maybe tens of millions of dollars on positive coverage that are going to impact the next states that are coming, right? But what I saw, which Crystal Ball from Rising pointed out, which is kind of true, I've seen it in every show now, want that. They want the race to be between Bernie and Joe, and they want to keep that because it's better ratings for them. They don't want to just be like, oh, the race is over. I've seen that for a lot of different mainstream shows. So Bernie has an opportunity here to be that kind of ratings guy for them, right? Like just fight Joe on the issues. But the problem is that I saw kind of like his concession speech the next day, and he keeps on saying, my friend Joe. I don't get it.
Yeah. Michael, thank you for the call. We really appreciate it. Brandon Sutton, does Elizabeth Warren's endorsement matter for anybody? Is she a possible VP pick, and what's the future of Elizabeth Warren's political career?
Well, wait, I kind of want to set that one up.
Sure.
Yeah, let's set that one up. Let's take a quick break. Let's come back and let's delve into this question of the VP pick, because that's one of the conversations that's being taken place on the left. And I kind of want to prep it with crystal ball so people can see her making that particular argument. Not to mention Sanders has also brought it up himself.
We're going to take a break real quick. We'll be back after this. So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits. I'm sorry, my name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. So we're joined by Brandon Sutton. So one of the questions that came up, one of the last callers and people have been talking about, is Warren as a VP pick. Now, Krista Ball mentioned this, I think it was yesterday on her show. Let's play this clip with Warren making her argument about Warren for the VP spot.
It's a good case. It's one they should have been making all along. It is coming to a debate stage and a television near you. It's a good start, but it's still not enough. Because the area where there is the most opportunity to potentially pick up votes and the greatest weakness right now is with suburban voters. So look, I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, but you need a game-changing shift, a media narrative, and an ability to grab a hold of that media narrative and change the fundamental underlying calculus. And the best idea I can come up with is at this point to sit down with Elizabeth Warren and offer her the VP slot.
Now, basically, she's effectively saying swallow hard and choose Warren, despite, and she knows that this is not necessarily going to be something that people are going to love, especially lefties who were burned by Warren on this, but that's her argument. Now, Sanders was asked about this by Rachel Maddow. Let's hear the clip with Sanders discussing Warren and potential spot on the administration with Maddow.
But in terms of Senator Warren, what I will tell you is that on major issue after major issue, we may have nuances of differences. But she is an advocate of Medicare for all, which obviously I strongly support. She wants to raise that minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour. She wants to cancel student debt. You know, we have a nuance of difference in that. But essentially, she has run her campaign in the way that we have, taking on powerful corporate interest and representing working families in this country, something that is long overdue.
Would you consider asking Senator Warren to be your running mate?
It's too early to talk about that, but certainly I have a lot of respect for Senator Warren and would love to sit down and talk to her about what kind of role she can play in our administration.
I cringe at that.
I wanted zoomed in a video of your face just in that moment. Was pretty
Well,
good.
he said we ran the same
disgust.
campaign and said he's never attacked her. He's never attacked her. She's been going after her for months. Brandon, I cringe at this. Should Sanders bring Warren into the VP spot if it will bring together, this kind of limousine liberal coalition that he may need? I mean, honestly, it's the Wine Cave group, the Pete group. Should he bring her on and offer her a spot on his administration, either VP ticket or some other aspect like Ball is saying?
Well, I mean, I'm confused about that. Is there some evidence that shows that she's doing, overly well with that particular population? like, I mean, no offense, but Hillary Clinton kind of lost that population, correct? Like, she didn't overperform in the general election with the suburban, again, this construct of the suburban white housewife that the Democratic Party loves. You know, like, for every 2 workers we lose, we're gonna gain 1 suburban housewife. I don't understand why we're still fetishizing that group. Sanders is not doing particularly well there, but that group is incredibly fickle, not just when it comes to the primary, but also the general election. It's like, so how is prioritizing Elizabeth Warren bringing in this mythical liberal suburban mom who, you know, is open to Sanders' policies, open to Warren's policies, but not open to Biden or Trump, but, you know, or rather who are open to these policies and who are offended by the Bidens and Trump. So, like, they're on the defense about, I don't know if these people exist in a number of people say that they do, right? This feels more, and not to be rude, this feels more like a fantasy for, like, the pundit class. This is like, because the pundit class likes Warren a lot. They like Warren a lot because they find that they have a certain affinity with her and her life story and her particular personality. That they are saying, like, oh yeah, and it feels like they're projecting that onto another population that might be desirable. But I mean, you know better than I would. I don't know if that's at the core. I think there's that might not be the population that is like it's worth overgoing for, like, just generally speaking. But I'm not even sure that she would be sufficient to bring them in. It's like that sounds like wishful thinking. But I mean, not to sort of go back in your court. Like, do you think that's like a thing that she's capable? Let's say, you know, it's not weird to have a ticket of just 2 septuagenarian people, just 2 almost 80-year-olds president and vice president.
Well, I feel, I mean,
both from the New England.
Yeah, I know, right?
I mean,
yeah,
like, doesn't
both
help
from the
as
same
well.
area. To be fair to Ball, I don't necessarily think Ball loves Warren. I mean, they've been going after her pretty heavily on this notion of her backstabbing and burning her reputation, helping effectively the Democratic Party put a knife in the guy. So I'm torn on this. My first response is no. I don't want Warren on that ticket. I don't want Warren anywhere near Sanders in this case, with the exception of maybe like a Treasury Secretary or something like that. But a VP, no. And I strongly suspect he's going to choose a woman of color for that particular role. And despite Warren's claiming to be Native American for the longest time, she is also now transformed back into a white person. So they may not necessarily have her as being the top of that list. I do think that I understand the positive media coverage from it, though. Meaning that's Ball's argument. Ball's argument is something needs to change in order to reinvigorate the campaign of sorts, and having this kind of big ticket Warren thing that the media loves, well, that gives positive press almost just in a natural way. By the same token, I have serious qualms with this. Like, you know, with the moment that you get Joe Biden on a debate stage and it's just Sanders and Biden in the race by themselves, well, under that situation, the majority of the people who are backing Warren are going to go to Sanders anyway. So it's like, I mean, you got like 40, 50% of the people who are backing Warren saying, yeah, I'll be okay with Sanders. This other fickle group that was more so to the right went to Biden and Pete and Klobuchar and everything else, and they're probably just going to go to Biden. So I don't know how much bang for your buck you get out of bringing Warren in on this that you wouldn't necessarily get just by Warren being out of it. Does it make sense?
It does. I hear you. Let's also get for you callers in here. Keith, thank you for your patience. What's your take on the primary and the state of affairs in U.S. politics?
Okay, well, recent polls show that Bernie is the only candidate who actually would defeat Trump, as they showed that he would have been in 2016. DNC knew that, but preferred to lose to Trump than to win with Bernie. Will history repeat itself?
Keith, thank you for the call. And that point to be made there, it's not like they're polling people saying if Bernie Sanders picks Elizabeth Warren and it was a Sanders-Warren ticket, would they beat Trump? No, Sanders can beat Trump
by himself,
head-to-head by himself right now. So you're looking for different things. You're looking for things that motivate, energize, excite different people. Sure, Elizabeth Warren in the news would feel good and be exciting for the next few days, but over the next 7-8 months, is that the thing that's going to galvanize and energize masses of people? I don't really think so, and I don't think our callers think so either. Nick, what are your thoughts here on Elizabeth Warren dropping out of the race?
I personally think that if like her dropping out doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who supported her is going to go to Sanders. I think at this point, if everybody who was supporting her hadn't like tuned out because of like how poorly she was displaying herself, I feel like they might tend to lead towards Biden, especially considering how much momentum he's gained in the past couple of days. So,
Nick, I completely agree with you. Thank you for the call. Isn't that wild that people could, in their minds, go from Elizabeth Warren to Joe Biden? I mean, I understand it, but it just feels weird to me that people are that wildly inconsistent with their ideologies and they're willing to just look at the person over what the person is saying. Tammy, I'm not sure what you think about that, but you wanted to talk a little bit about Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you, Jamal, on both of you on the new show.
Thank you.
Also, a lot of people were angry about the fact that Elizabeth stayed in the race during Super Tuesday and pulled a lot of votes from Bernie and a lot of super delegates from Bernie, and I was angry too, but at the same time, I wasn't even surprised, because I think people forget that in 2016, Bernie begged Elizabeth to run, and she refused. And then she didn't support him during that either, because she had already talked to Hillary Clinton, possibly about a VP role, and then she ended up picking Tim Kaine. She's a rank proper, she's an opportunist. She, it's about her getting what she wants, and she's very untrustworthy, and I really hope that Bernie does not try to bring her in on the ticket, because I think in the long run that would hurt him.
Yep. Thank you, Tammy, for the call. Greatly appreciated. Brandon, any thoughts on what you just heard there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that was my initial argument, though. I don't know that they're trying to make a practical argument about making her the VP that I don't know if when they actually exist. I don't know if if Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders sort of teaming up is enough to excite people beyond for a few days, and then people shift to whatever side they feel more ideologically comfortable with. So I think the suburban mom thing, the suburban voter construct that keeps being brought up here is a fact. It's a way for not necessarily crystal ball specifically. But she is operating in those spheres where this narrative that Elizabeth Warren is the key to unlock the white woman vote is being perpetuated. I don't know if that actually translates to real votes.
Brandon, do you think people need Elizabeth Warren to tell them which way to go? Do you think people are like, I don't know, Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, let me just wait another day or two and see what Elizabeth Warren has to say about it? Or will people make up their minds regardless of what Elizabeth Warren has to say?
I think Elizabeth Warren's endorsement is right now because we're going to be voting before there's going to be another debate.
Yeah.
It's a way for that to be counteracted, the lack of visibility of Biden versus Bernie, on the same stage together. However, in the long run, I think it's taking a VP right now comes across as a gimmick, comes across as desperate. An endorsement is fine. However that pans out in the future is whatever. But to pick her as a VP right now comes across as desperate. I think this is the pundit class, the mainstream media class, trying to exert control over the Sanders presidency in a way that's that they feel makes them more comfortable with it. That may not reflect to the average voter again. Then this is what sunk Elizabeth Warren's campaign too. It's this kind of logic, over listening to the pundit class and believing their fairy tales and fan fiction about what the average voter wants is what sunk Elizabeth Warren's campaign.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, this notion of whether or not bringing an endorsement would help. I mean, if we look at Klobuchar and we look at Pete, Biden went up 12 points overnight. And it was almost entirely from that, meaning those two leaving. I mean, Minnesota. I mean, Biden was able to take Minnesota based off of Klobuchar's endorsement. It was astonishing. Even South Carolina with Clyburn's endorsement. The endorsement does seem to get bang for its buck, especially from the standpoint of a media who pays attention to it, who loves it. But I agree with you on the VP spot. I'm sketchy on that, on giving
Let's
Warren
see what
the VP
here
spot.
Brian has to say. Brian, what are your thoughts here on Elizabeth Warren dropping out of the race?
Hey, what's up, fella?
Hey, what's up, man?
All right, hey, I got a couple quick points, very quick. All right, look, it's good that Warren dropped out, but no VP because she's not going to bring anything. She's already flailing, so leave that out. Now, I think Sanders needs to come out early and announce Nina Turner as his VP pick. I think that'll be great, especially for the black community because she has a lot of energy and she's about her business. And another second one is that, look, if Bernie doesn't get the nomination, we should still support him, give him money, and support his campaign. But if he doesn't get the nomination, we need to be looking forward to 2024 and get a progressive in there who will actually fight. Because Bernie's not fighting like he's supposed to, and we're all looking at that like, what the hell?
Yep. Ryan, thank you for the call. We just have one more caller on the line here. Alex, you wanted to talk about Joe Biden and creepiness from him.
Yeah. Well, has the media completely abandoned Me Too? Has all of this stuff, was his apology really enough? I mean, we probably all watched it, and it was such a tepid, weak apology, and he almost made jokes about it shortly afterwards, and I don't know. It's really disgusting to me what kind of passes he manages to get, with his just routine gaffes. But also, I think this is a much bigger issue, is just his approach to women in general, and just his horrible record on Roe v. Wade, and it's just I don't know. It's incredible to me the kinds of things that media is able to just sort of bury and keep quiet.
No, thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. I mean, even the stuff with Anita Hill, and what's wild to me, Brandon, is that Donald Trump will use the creepy Joe Biden thing against Joe Biden. I mean, Donald Trump, the man who has done all the stuff he's done, and yet he'll somehow be able to turn that against Joe Biden in a more effective way than any of the Democratic challengers.
It's so bizarre.
It's bizarre. I mean, Joe Biden, and I remember when Joe Biden first announced his candidacy, and one of the things that was going around, like in the back channels of, I don't know, independent media and so forth, exists is like, hey, you know what, we're going to try to keep to Joe Biden's record. We're going to try to keep to, the crime bill and Anita Hill, like the way in which he has actively, instigated policies that have negatively affected vulnerable populations. And we're going to not sort of get mired in his scandalous, weird behavior. But that went out the window so quickly because it's so hard to ignore. Like, Joe Biden's behavior is so bizarre and so just incoherent. It makes me feel crazy when I'm listening to him and no one else seems to be willing to, engage with this facet of it. Like, even when they had the debate, this was one, oh my God, there's so many of these. It was like, we need to punch domestic violence in the face. And everyone was just like, well, moving on.
We need to punch domestic violence in the face. I love that. We have a few comments. Xavier Foster, no way in hell that Warrington will endorse Bernie. Oh, that's the other interesting question, Brandon. Will she endorse Sanders? We have two more. Dudas Priest, please explain the differences between suspending and dropping out. Don't think a candidate with delegates would want to drop out. And also, regarding Warren as a VP pick, makes me think of McKinley choosing Roosevelt, and that didn't end well for McKinley, but great for Roosevelt. Any comments, Brandon?
I mean, in terms of her endorsing Sanders,
yeah.
Warren, I don't believe that Warren was a malicious actor. Well, let me rephrase that. I believe that Warren's presence in the primary had a negative effect on Sanders' ability to coalesce the progressive movement behind him, because she offered an out for the higher earners in that population who might be implicated by Sanders' message of it's not just the billionaires, it's also the media, and it's also the PMC class that we kind of have to start actively not dissolving but investigating how deleterious they are to society. She offered a lot of exemptions. It's not the media is our friend. It's not the corporate media. Sorry, they're not. So I think that her existence in the race definitely did hurt him. I don't think, however, she was a malicious actor. I think in reality, she had a lot of bad advice from a lot of establishment-aligned consultants, and we ended up where we are now with her losing every state. In terms of how that affects her endorsement, yeah, I think that if it were up to her and she was making this decision unilaterally, she might endorse. But I also think bad political impulses. Impulses, despite how she got the moniker of the smart candidate, are probably worse than Hillary Clinton's are. And that's saying a lot. She's not a good politician, not a good front-facing politician. Knows a lot about banking, knows a lot about financing, politicking. No. And so if she stops outsourcing that to people who don't mean her any well, maybe she comes to the right decision. I think it'd have a positive effect on his campaign, definitely, though. So I hope she does it.
What's your model of Warren, by the way? And what I mean by model, meaning what do you think her intentions are in the race? Like you said, you don't think she's a malicious actor. I got to be honest, I've been more cynical on this point, where my thought was the entire party is coalescing to stop Sanders. And I would even argue that might have started when Warren went to Sanders early on saying, I'm going to run in the race, with the thought that you don't have to since I'm going to do it. We know that there was this kind of Stop Sanders coalition that had organized years ago. And whether or not she was part of it, I wasn't always sure. I think based on what has been taking place over the last few months, though, it seems like she was part of it. And so, whether or not she would endorse Sanders is probably going to depend on two things. A, what she thinks her political ambitions are going to be. Because let's be honest, in 2016, she backed Clinton. She backed Clinton because she thought Clinton was a lock to win that race and that she was going to get some kind of political compensation for it and get political concessions. This was also something that was reported, I think it was NBC News. And so why would that be different this time around? She obviously wasn't hitting Biden. She was hitting the person who was supposedly ideologically closest to her. And it did seem like she was working in context or in coordination with the party in order to slow him down, if not outright stop him. Now, this could also, though, change on a dime if she believes her political ambitions are better served with somebody like Sanders. So what's your model of her if you don't think she's a malicious actor in this?
So here's where I'm going to disagree, right? And so you claim that your opinion is cynical. My opinion is actually even more cynical, even though it doesn't me having a lower opinion of her. Because here's the thing: like, if she were a malicious actor whose only goal it was to take down, all she really had to do is stay in the exact same lane she was in the first two debates, where the difference between the two was incredibly hard to determine, and therefore the base was just being split organically, where it was like, hey, you know what, some people are going to prefer Warren because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Some people are going to prefer Bernie, but they both have legitimate claims to, like, being in this race to enact progressive ideology. Somewhere along the line, that changed to being her distancing herself from Bernie, tracking to the center, tracking to the right, and losing support, losing the political capital and goodwill she's earned over the past, 10 years in the Senate, losing a lot of the progressive base that was more, friendlier to her at the beginning of this, as it became harder and harder to determine whether or not, as you said, she was part of this concerted effort to derail Sanders' campaign. So from my perspective, as somebody who likes doing bad things and not getting caught, in my head, it's like, okay, but if your goal was just to stop Sanders, you didn't have to make you have to put your entire political career in jeopardy. It's like you didn't have to, come out and have people thinking that you're a backstabber or a snake or any of these things, because all you could have done is stuck to your banking bona fides, attacked Biden a little bit on banking, presented yourself as this alternative to Sanders in an earnest way and never go negative on him, because that's just going to hurt you, and just split the base organically. So when she attacks Sanders, she does worse. Sanders doesn't do that much worse. Sanders has been able to carve out her supporters as they have become more and more just Clinton dead enders who have projected their love of Clinton onto her. And so from my perspective, I don't think saying she's malicious implies there's a certain level of, like, devious coordination that she's engaging in. No, I think she got rolled, honestly. I think she tried to be the best of both worlds. In the beginning, in the first two debates, she did fine to me. She came more across as Bernie's hype man than someone with original ideas. It is what it is. And as time went on, she hired more and more of Clinton world, more and more of the ex-Kamala's campaign staffers, and you saw that mentality infect her campaign. And she was just unable to extricate herself from that. So my model of Warren in my head is not of the malicious actor. It's of somebody who is an expert in banking, an expert in finance, who is incredibly bad at front-facing politics, and outsourced her front-facing politics to, people who probably had really good CVs from working on the Clinton campaign and the Tim Kaine campaign, and they ran her career into the ground. And she listened to them trying to appeal to the center that was never going to have her. And that's a much worse version of her, because it implies she was tricked. And a lot of people she was tricked, and and a lot of her supporters were tricked along with her. But unfortunately, her and her supporters share a common kind of nerd affinity of, like, the too smart, academic professor, like, book smart people. They'll never admit they were conned. They were conned by Clinton world. They would never admit that they were conned by a bunch of people who couldn't beat Donald Trump into thinking that they had the keys to the kingdom by attacking Bernie, and because they were just trying to nurse a grievance. So, I mean, I honestly think that, like, she looks so guilty when she's doing something, like, obviously bad that it's hard to believe that she's comfortable with doing it. I just think she has really, really bad political impulses, and she's a cautionary tale to any person who is trying to be a reformist or a revolutionary within the Democratic Party, that you cannot work with these people or you cannot work with these people to the degree that you think you can. It's like you can't let them determine your platforms and your mannerisms and your values, or, like, your political, because they're bad at that stuff too. This is she's learning about the myth of the meritocracy of the consulting class in the Democratic Party the hard way. And she tried to have a candidate, and just started to wrap up my point, where she's proving a fundamental truth another fundamental truth about the Democratic Party now, is that you can't speak to the left base and the center anymore at the same time. You can't. The schism has become too wide. You can try to ride that fence, but people are rapidly becoming aware that those are two incommensurable positions.
Yep, that's Brandon Sutton with the Discourse Podcast. Brandon, thank you so much for the extra minutes there. We'll let you get back to it all. Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter. Brandon, thank you again.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Sorry for just going on a rant there.
No,
Keep
dude,
going on it. Listen to
awesome.
the Discourse Podcast. I'm going to listen to it. I'm a big fan. I love the rants there. A few different things here that Brandon said that are on my mind real quick. Yeah, political instincts. Don't take a DNA test when you already lied about being a Native American. Double down after no one's asked you to do it. That right there showed that the political instincts may not have been the best focal point. As for the back channel conversations between Clinton and Warren, this is what we were kind of talking behind off air the other day about whether or not it was sincere. Or did Hillary Clinton just set you up? Sure, whatever you want. We got you. Just come on over to our side, play the long game a little bit with us. And this is where she has ended up. And I'm not surprised in that regard. A lot of other things to say here about Elizabeth Warren. I'll let our callers get in here before I go any longer. Aaron, thank you for holding. You wanted to talk about Elizabeth Warren.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Tuesday night was fun, huh?
Tuesday night was not fun. Tuesday night was brutal.
Well, when I called in on Monday, I explained that the South Carolina primary had left me bedridden. So Tuesday night basically put me in a coma for the last 24 hours. But here's what I want to say about Elizabeth Warren. I really don't think she's acting in bad faith. I think she was stuck in this bubble of her campaign where she thought, she was front runner for a while there in 2019. And I thought she thought she could regain that somehow, either through bashing Sanders or playing into the more woke kind of politics. And ultimately, and even with Bloomberg going after his NDA, she thought she can grab onto that. But ultimately, she just couldn't find her path back on.
Yep, Aaron, I hear you. And it's bad faith or it's just bad politics. And you could hear it when I was in Iowa. I went to the rally, and she tried to, like Brandon said, play both sides. She wanted to say, we have racial inequality, and we need to address it because it's really bad. But I'm not going to say any of the policies, because if I actually get into the policies, what that means, it's not going to be a winning issue in this room right now. So she tried to kind of say and, genuflect towards the right to the left on an issue like economic racial inequality that needs to be addressed. And she says, we're going to spend more on HBCUs. Well, you're in Iowa, lady. What HBCUs in Iowa exist and you're spending more money on? And it's like, well, there's nothing there. So she's saying the things that, I think centrist, right-wing liberals want to hear about racial inequality and the civil rights and the fight for the fight, because we got to fight to make things better. But if you actually get into the policies like Bernie Sanders does, all of a sudden you're going to lose a lot of those marijuana legalization. Are you kidding me? Expunging records. Are you kidding me? These people aren't for that. They're for more people in prison. Muriel Bowser, the mayor of this city. London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco. These people want more people in prison because they have more police than ever before on their streets, policing the streets. These people don't want expungement of records and have to reintegrate tens of thousands of people. And so yet she tries to play both sides of it. It was bad politics. Play the center. Say, I'm a centrist. I'm not with Sanders. I'm going to focus on banking. I'm going to fix these things up. Take that lane, or stick to the left and go to Sanders' left somehow, or at least speak out on it. She tried to play some middle ground. There's not enough voters there. That's why she's finished 10% across the board in all these states, finished third place in Massachusetts. Karen, thank you for holding. You want to jump in here on the election results?
Okay, well, the question that I have for you all actually is, what websites do you go to assess whether or not the election results are accurate or inaccurate? What are your sources on that? Because ever since I came across Bev Harris, if you have heard of her.
Yeah, she's been on the show once.
Okay, well, I'm skeptical of election results, just because I have, come across websites like hers that have questioned the accuracy of anything less than hand-counted paper ballots, kind of like they do at the Vatican.
Thank you for your call there, Karen. Tell us a little bit more about that, Jamal.
So Beth Harris came on the show. She was discussing election integrity, basically that the results are dodgy at best, meaning it goes beyond just the number of people who are being thrown off the rolls. As you know, each year we have like hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people thrown off the voter rolls, especially in Republican areas. Like, for example, I think it was Georgia, where Stacey Abrams was running, and, you know, he had all of these people tossed off the rolls. But that's not just there. That's all across the United States, especially at the destruction or after the destruction of the Voting Rights Act. Same thing in Texas. You had lines in Texas where they shut down a slew of polling locations in the areas where they had the largest and the fastest growing Hispanic and Black populations. So it goes beyond just the messing around with the electoral system to voting itself. Meaning a lot of people are making the argument that there's something wrong with the voting results. In any other country, I mean, look at what took place in Bolivia. In Bolivia, they screamed, oh, there was a coup or there was election malfeasance. The guy won by like 10 points. Now, the exit polling in the United States, in many of the states, for some reason, don't always match up with the actual results. And oftentimes that deviation can be severe, especially in 2016. The deviations in state after state after state was pretty severe. At one point in California, they even stopped doing election exit polling. That's how bad it got. And so when people are looking at this, I don't blame anybody for looking at the voting and integrity of the system, saying, I want to be able to know that the system is legit, that the person who we voted for is indeed the person who got elected. And you have these machines that often don't have paper trails, or even if you do have a paper trail, do you really ever pay attention to the paper trail when you walk out? You just kind of assume that your vote was recounted. It's some electrical device, and as somebody who was a software engineer, I can tell you, you can spoof all sorts of stuff in regards to software. I've seen people hack into these machines when they were trying to show that the machines themselves weren't entirely safe. And so, you know, our election system, despite screaming that we're the best in the world, there should be a little bit more clarity and transparency in regards to our system, whether that would be paper ballots. I got to be honest, I don't care if the election results take a day in order to come out, providing that they're right and that I know they're right. And you don't have multiple people, a percentage of the country looking at this saying, I think you guys were gaming the system. I mean, Beth Harris, her main point is the elections are dodgy, that the elections aren't necessarily legit. And then one state after the next, you'd get exit polling that's different than what the actual result is by large deviations, especially in 2016. I don't know about 2020. I haven't looked at 2020, but 2016 was pretty onerous.
Andrew Yang launches today a PAC, Humanity First.
Interesting.
He says he ponders whether he'll have a presidential endorsement or not. You missed the game, my guy. If you're going to endorse anybody, I think that window's passed at this point.
That's interesting because Biden had mentioned Yang once before. Of being on the ticket, or Yang made reference to that.
I didn't take any seriousness.
Yeah, I didn't take it seriously.
They're just going to get feelers for people's response.
Yeah, I think what Biden wants is a Yang endorsement. That's what Biden
wants. I don't know if it means anything to the Yang gang out there, but they'll have somewhere to put their money, and his universal basic income idea here. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Elizabeth Warren does over the next 24 hours. I mean,
how much she's going to endorse?
You know, I want to stick with what I said before. I said she wouldn't. But I guess I want to be contrarian to myself now. It's just like in my contrarian nature that she will. I don't know what else is there to think about. I mean, you've already thought about this, obviously, the last few months. Yeah. Hey, if I at some point contemplating this thing and what it means and gone down the different paths and stuff. If it was her team, we talked about the PCCC and Adam Green. He's obviously, no, screw them all. But I don't know what her supporters want. I don't know what the future of her political career looks like at this point. I mean, if it's a position in the administration, I think Biden or Sanders would be more than happy to have her in the administration. So I don't think she needs to endorse either of them if she wants to secure a position within the cabinet moving forward. I don't know if she has enough leverage on either of them to say, make me the VP pick, because that's going to do anything for you. I think people have already made up their minds since she's dropped out over the last 4 hours that they'll either go to Biden or Sanders now. And so I don't really know, again, what her endorsement means. I definitely, if I was either of them, wouldn't give up anything for her endorsement if it meant VP pick. Yeah. I don't know.
I wouldn't give her the VP pick either for the thing. On Morning Consult, they have 40% of supporters of Warren would go to Sanders. 16% will go to Biden or Buttigieg. Well, Buttigieg, Klobuchar is out the race, so the question becomes, what's that percentage, and does that percentage increase? So that becomes interesting. I wouldn't give her a VP pick for that, but I do want to endorse her.
Big thank you, Kathy Kelly, Ambassador Peter Ford, Brandon Sutton, and all of those who called in today to Political Misfits. I'm sure we'll have another big show for you tomorrow. Thank you again for listening. Now get back to organizing.